Hi and welcome or welcome back to The Books Are Everywhere. So today's video is going to be a bit different. This is my first kind of video essay, like serious sit down video, because we do have quite a serious topic to discuss. As you may or may not remember me talking about in a lot of my videos over the winter period, HarperCollins were on strike in New York City from November to February. This is something I covered a lot in my videos because instead of discussing books that were published by HarperCollins, I promoted the strike instead. This was something that a lot of reviewers were doing, and it's what the HarperCollins union were kind of asking reviewers to do, which was hold back reviews of HarperCollins books. It was kind of the only way that us as reviewers, as well as donating to and supporting the union, could show that we were serious about HarperCollins workers achieving what they deserve and were fighting for. So I chose to withhold all of my reviews during that period and also not discuss HarperCollins books on this channel and instead promote the union and promote the strike. So we are now a couple of months on from the strike, and it's been in my head for a while that I wanted to produce a video that actually showcased what happened during the strike and give a kind of overview. Now we are past it, and now the HarperCollins union are back at work in New York. I wanted to give a summary of what happened and also discuss why I think this strike is so important and also reflective all over the world, and America and the world, and publishing as an industry. This is something I could produce many videos on, and I hope to produce many videos on in the future if this is something that is interesting to you guys, because I do have a lot of thoughts and feelings on the publishing industry, and I would like to discuss why I chose to not go into it after doing a publishing degree. But I genuinely do think that what happened at HarperCollins is reflective and has a ripple effect on what is happening throughout the publishing industry as a whole, and it's part of the reason why I chose to talk about this, even though I am across the pond in the UK and it's not something that was directly affecting me. I think the type of things that HarperCollins workers were fighting for, such as fair wages and diversity initiatives, which we will discuss in much more detail throughout this video, is something that is important across the entire industry, both here in America and across the globe. So I created this video with massive help from a HarperCollins employee who I talked to about the strike. They are somebody who did strike over the winter period and are part of the union themselves, and this video is massively drawing on their knowledge of being on the inside and being on strike. So any discussions that I have in this video is something that I have discussed with them and we have talked about. I will be taking you throughout this video. We will be starting on what led up to the strike and why the union chose to go on strike in the first place and what that process looked like. We will then discuss what it was actually like being in the strike for workers every day throughout the winter period. We will then discuss the contract itself, what was wanted and put forward by the union and what was achieved in the end. And we'll also talk about what it was like going back to work after that contract was agreed on. And last but not least, we will talk about some books that were released over the winter period by HarperCollins and maybe didn't get their time in the spotlight because obviously the HarperCollins workers were on strike and we as reviewers were holding back our reviews and our discussions about these books. So I wanted to use this as a chance to promote some of the books as well. I will also link the HarperCollins Union social media down below, so if you do, as always, whenever I've discussed this in a video, want to check out more information from the HarperCollins Union themselves, please check out the links below. So the HarperCollins Union went on strike on November 11th, 2023. This followed a long process of negotiations between the HarperCollins union and HarperCollins over their contract. Their contract had expired, they had no settlement on a new contract, and they felt like they weren't being heard or getting anywhere, and then decided that they were able to go on strike. So when a contract is in effect, there is an agreement between the HarperCollins union workers and HarperCollins themselves that there is a no strike, no lockout clause. So in good faith, the union workers won't go on strike, and in return, HarperCollins won't lock the union out of the negotiation room. So they were working out of contract from early 2022. They were trying to negotiate, but it was a much lower salary than they wanted that was being offered, and nothing was really moving in a productive way. Because of this and because they were working out of contract, there was a vote to go on a one-day strike to try and show HarperCollins that they were serious about being paid a living wage. So on this day, workers had a one-day strike and they were not paid by HarperCollins for that day. Instead, they were paid by fundraising efforts. Despite this one-day strike, nothing was heard from management and there was no effort made to come to the bargaining table over the contracts. So the union were then free in October to vote on a prolonged open-ended strike. So with a majority vote for this prolonged strike, they walked out of their jobs on November 11th and went on this open-ended prolonged strike. This was to try and show that, one, the union was serious about needing these initiatives and needing the fair wage that they were asking for, but also to try and show how much of their labour was going into the bookmaking process and how much they rely on their workers. As we already know, this strike did not end until February 2023, and the HarperCollins union were left to strike outside in New York City throughout the winter in the cold. They were also only paid for holidays by the company. These were holidays that were predetermined by the company, and they were paid about $100 over the course of the winter from HarperCollins themselves. The majority of the bargaining unit were on strike, either at home or in New York City, depending on whether they were remote workers or not, and they didn't really hear anything until January 25th, in which HarperCollins decided they wanted to start a mediation process. So a mediator is given federally, and they were approached by HarperCollins to come to the bargaining table at the end of January. So this is a third party that is objective to any decision making between HarperCollins and the union. So they are there to unemotionally facilitate a conversation between the two, and it allowed the two, so HarperCollins and the union bargaining committee, to sit in two different rooms, and the mediator kind of goes between them. So in this process as well, HarperCollins couldn't just say no or refuse to do something. They had to explain the reasoning behind that. Mediation ended in the first week of February, and voting on the new contract began once the committee felt like they were able to approach the rest of the union with a contract that was agreeable to them. The contract was then presented to the union, and there was a chance to discuss any issues they feel like they had or give any support for the contract. They voted a couple of days later after being given a chance to think about the contract, and they ratified on February 9th and went back to work on February 21st. So as I said, I did speak to somebody who works at HarperCollins about their experience being on strike, and I asked them what their experience of being on strike was like and some of the positives and negatives about being on strike. So some of the negatives they said is that it was very physically tiring, more so than they expected. Obviously, being out on a picket line, you're out in the cold, it was winter, but also you're physically walking for miles a day, often carrying something, carrying a poster, a board, or speaking to people, maybe speaking into a microphone. It's obviously quite physically taxing, and the union had to decide when they wanted to kind of finish for the day, when it was too much, and whether they would have to kind of call it a day. The staff member I spoke to said that they often had questions running through their head. Obviously, being on strike, you have a lot of time to think about your job as well, and they said that they often thought, is this really worth it? They felt like the company didn't really value them as much as they originally thought or hoped, because they've obviously let you go on strike with no response. It's hard to kind of grapple with feelings for a company when trying to figure out how to move forward, either within or outside the job itself. And what does it mean if HarperCollins are willing to let these workers strike? It's mentally difficult for people working on the outside and striking, but also people working on the inside, and apparently morale on the inside was very low throughout this period. But obviously there are also some positives about being on strike, and one of the things that I suspected would be a massive positive, which was confirmed by the employee that I spoke to, was that the working with people was amazing and the morale throughout the strike was really high. There was an opportunity to build new relationships with people who were also on strike, perhaps people across different departments that they wouldn't normally speak to. And wages did actually increase after the strike as well. I think one of the most important things that came up in our conversation is the changes that were obviously made because of the strike, which has not only been within HarperCollins, but the other top 5 publishers have kind of followed suit and have raised their starting salaries following HarperCollins, causing real change across the industry and a real ripple effect throughout these big 5 publishers. The HarperCollins employee I spoke to said that they were really doing their best to improve the working conditions for anyone else who wants to come into the industry, ready to work and often with a really positive outcome on the industry. They also wanted to dismantle the financial barrier for people coming into publishing themselves, which is often a factor when people consider entering the industry. BIPOC are more likely to not have the financial cushion from their parents, their backgrounds, to be able to work a low-paying job, causing another issue for diversity in the workplace. Retention is important too, and people should be able to afford to work and sustainably grow and continue in the workplace, making it diverse and inclusive, and this was another one of the important factors on having a better living wage. So the HarperCollins union is affiliated with the United Auto Workers, which is a bigger American labour union that represents workers in the United States and Canada. So throughout this time, people on strike were not actually paid by HarperCollins at all. As I said, they were only paid for a few predetermined public holidays that were decided by the company, but they were actually paid by the United Auto Workers. So they were paid quite a lot less than they normally would be, obviously if they were still working in their normal jobs. But they could also apply for an emergency fund, which was fundraised on behalf of the HarperCollins union, and if they did need any extra money on top of what they were assigned by the UAW, they could apply for that fund. As I already said, one of the most important and positive things to come out of the strike is the changes that have been made both within and outside HarperCollins. And the next thing I want to discuss is the actual contract itself, what was asked for by the union, why they went on strike in the first place, and what was achieved by ratifying the contract at the end of the process. So a few of the main things that the union were on strike for. The first and probably biggest thing I think that came up in our discussion was a fair wage. So the entry level before the strike was $45,000, which was pretty industry standard at the time, which I have to address as somebody from the UK, that sounds like quite a lot of money to me. That's roughly £36,000, which for me is much higher than entry-level jobs in publishing in the UK, which are often early 20,000s, like it's a lot lower. However, we have to remember that there are so many cultural differences between this country and the US, and this is also in New York, where obviously living costs are a lot higher. So that being an entry-level salary is significantly low for them. So they asked for the starting salary to be $50,000, and that each time a staff member had a promotion, it was a 15% increase of the starting salary, meaning these salary bands were a lot more meaningful for staff when they got a promotion. They were also on strike for diversity initiatives, and they wanted workers to be compensated for any diversity, equity and inclusion work that was done. They were also on strike for better agreements when it comes to maternity leave and childcare, and they also wanted monthly meetings with HR so the bargaining unit could meet and discuss any grievances they had as they arise, just to have more constant communication with the company. So not everything the HarperCollins union asked for was achieved in the final contract, but I just wanted to quickly go through what the final contract looked like when they did return to work in late February. So just after the HarperCollins union went on strike in November, there was a required 2 days in the office put in place. Part of the contract was to delay this so union members didn't have to be in the office until July 1st, 2 days a week, to give people time to move back to the city if they needed to organise travel, to organise a place to live, and to apply to be a remote worker if needed. Also, part of the contract is that the company is now obligated to distribute a union letter and a membership card in the new hire packet, helping the union to stay strong and sustain numbers. So they were also allowed more union stewards, so that's people who are actively interacting with the company, and in orientation a member of the bargaining unit would be able to meet with a union steward for an hour to demystify and discuss the union, which also helps to sustain numbers. They added 2 days to the official list of paid holidays, so they had a total of 17 paid holidays per year. And there was a joint Labour Management Committee meeting monthly as minimum or as needed, so the union could bring forth any issues on behalf of the union and continually work on these issues, hopefully improving communication as well. So any time spent working on the Labour Management Committee and any company-sponsored diversity, equity and inclusion work had to be paid for accordingly. This couldn't be volunteer time, and overtime could be taken for diversity work accordingly. Any time that was spent working on the Labour Management Committee and any company-sponsored diversity, equity and inclusion work was now to be paid for by the company accordingly, and the people working could not be told that they had to take it as volunteer time. Any overtime that was taken for diversity work would also be paid. Upon ratification, the entry-level salary went up to $47,500 a year, increasing every year, so by January 1st, 2025, it will be $50,000 a year. So negotiations will start again soon for a new contract because the contract will expire in January 2025. So now we've discussed the contract and what it was like to come to the end of that strike, I also asked the employee I talked to what it was like going back into work and going back into the office after such a long period of time. They said it was really strange and it felt really odd. Sometimes it felt like they had actually never left. There was a lot of staff that worried that they'd forgotten how to do their job or whether they were still good at their job. It was good to reconnect with authors they work with and co-workers who stayed on the inside and didn't communicate with them throughout the strike. People were overall really happy to be back at work and doing what they loved, but it obviously also had some difficulties. So during the strike there was an announcement that there was going to be a 5% reduction of the workforce, which meant there was some people laid off during the actual strike occurring, meaning obviously things did look a bit different when they went back to work after the strike. So in some ways, transitioning back into work felt really easy, but there is difficulties because of the restructuring process, which is still going on, and nothing will be really clear until July, which is the end of the fiscal year. So I think that's everything that I spoke to the employee at HarperCollins about, but I just wanted to reiterate why I felt like this was such an important video to make, because although it is so important what's happened at HarperCollins, and I think this is something that we do need to talk about, and unfortunately, although being on strike is obviously it can be such a negative experience, and it's one of those things that we don't want workers to have to strike in any industry, because striking obviously means that something is not right and is not working. There is some positives that have come out of this, and I think one of the most positive and uplifting things that we discussed is the fact that this will create change and has already created change for the next influx into publishing as an industry. There are people constantly, myself included, who come out of university and want to go into a career in publishing, and I feel like this will honestly help across the globe. Like it will obviously help people working for HarperCollins and has already helped people working for HarperCollins, but it also has a ripple effect across the industry, both in New York, in America and in the UK. I think the issues that we have raised discussing this and that HarperCollins raised as an issue for them as workers is something that we do see as a problem across the industry as a whole. I know from studying publishing and from being in the kind of book world the past few years that there are definitely issues in the UK as well in publishing when it comes to disability, diversity, low wages. There is definitely a lot of issues that we have discussed today that are reflected in publishing in the UK as well. And I think the only way that we create change is by talking about it, is by discussing it, and is by sometimes more serious matters like going on strike, as the HarperCollins union did. And that's why I think it's so important that I discuss this now, because I honestly think that this is something that's happening across the publishing industry and is not necessarily completely reflective of HarperCollins as a publishing house. I think this is something that we do see across the industry as a whole, and we will continue to see, but taking positive steps like this mean that hopefully there will be less issues as the years go on. As I said, I think I could make a lot of videos about this, and if you want me to, if you think this is an interesting topic and you've enjoyed this video, let me know if this is something you would want to hear more about, because I would like to do more serious sit-down video essays with you. But for now, I think this is coming to the end of this video, and I just wanted to take the rest of this video to discuss some of the books that came out while HarperCollins workers were on strike. The first one is How to Excavate a Heart by Jake Arlo, and honestly, personally, this is the hardest one for me that I was not able to talk about this book. I read this book around the time it came out. I think it came out in December, and I loved it so much, and we were in this period where we were withholding our thoughts and feelings and reviews of HarperCollins books. I so desperately wanted to share this book with all of you, but I couldn't. So I am very glad that I'm able to put this book in this video, because How to Excavate a Heart by Jake Arlo is such an amazing title, and it came out when the HarperCollins Union were on strike. The next one is Belittled Women by Amanda Sillett. Then there is Reader, I Murdered Him by Betsy Cornwall. Such a great title. The Runestone Saga, Children of Ragnarok by Cinder Williams-Chima. A Million to One by Adiba Jaigerda. This is an author that I've read from before, and I really like their work. I can't wait to read A Million to One. There's also 9 Liars by Maureen Johnson. Acting the Part by Z.R. Ella. Heartbreak Boys by Simon James Green. The 7% of Roe Devereaux by Ellen O'Clover. Break Up from Hell by Anne de Villa Cardinal. Riven by Mindy Arnett. This Is Not a Personal Statement by Tracy Badua. One Last Shot by Kip Wilson. Then Everything Happens at Once by M.E. Gerard. Reggie and Delilah's Year of Falling by Elise Bryant. The Cartographers by Amy Zhang. Play the Game by Charlene Allen. Manifest by Brittany Cavallaro. These Infinite Threads by Tahara Mafi. Out of Character by Jenna Miller. Revel by Lisa Mia Smith. And last but not least, My Flawless Life by Yvonne Woon. A few of those books are on my TBR, and I cannot wait to read them. And as I said, I've read How to Excavate a Heart, which I absolutely adored. So that brings me to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed this video, or at least maybe enjoyed is the wrong word, but I hope you found it really, really interesting. I certainly found it interesting. This is something that I feel is close to my heart, and I followed the HarperCollins strike throughout the entire process, and I did just want to kind of give you all a bit of a summary over what really happened and why I feel like this is such an important topic that we should continue to discuss, even though HarperCollins workers have been back at work now for a couple of months. But anyway, I hope you did enjoy this video or find it informative, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Not all of my videos are this serious, but felt like this was an interesting and really important topic to touch on. So hopefully I'll see you in another video, even if it's a bit different to this one. Bye.